Hello everyone, welcome back to another Project Gladiator weather forecast. Today I'll be covering the weather for April 2nd of 2024, and currently we have a moderate risk that extends from southern Ohio into southern Indiana and northern Kentucky, with an enhanced risk that it spans all the way from northern Ohio, West Virginia, almost the entirety of Tennessee, into parts of western Georgia, almost down to southern Alabama and northeastern Mississippi. We definitely have a very large area for the potential of severe thunderstorms, some of which could potentially be significant, and we definitely could see a dangerous day ahead of us. As for our various risks, starting off with our tornado risk, we do have a 15% tornado risk for the moderate threat area. This is going to be the primary driver for that moderate threat area, and we could see the potential of a significant tornado that may extend all the way down across the entire enhanced risk region, all the way down into Alabama and Georgia. But this 15%, we are watching for the potential of a tornado outbreak later this afternoon. And then for our damaging wind risk, we do have a 30% that does extend down into northern Alabama and Mississippi, but we do have a hatched area that spans anywhere from Ohio, southern Indiana, West Virginia, into a small portion of northern Tennessee there, where we could see the potential of some destructive damaging wind gusts. And then as for our hail risk, we do have a 30%, which does take the shape of the same 30% for our damaging wind risk, but we also have a hatched area for southern Ohio, southern Indiana, in northern Kentucky, where we could see some massive hail. And then for tomorrow, we do have a dual slight risk setup, and our risks for today do include for tomorrow do include a 2% tornado risk, 15% damaging wind risk, and a 15% hail risk for the northern mode there. And then for day 3 outlook, we currently don't have any areas for the potential of severe thunderstorms currently issued. But then for our day 5 outlook, we do have a 15% currently issued for southern Kansas, extending across western and central Oklahoma into northern Texas there, where we are watching for the potential of some upcoming significant severe thunderstorms. Taking a look at our excessive rainfall forecast for today, we do have a slight risk that extends anywhere from southwestern Pennsylvania, southern Ohio, and eastern Ohio, the majority of West Virginia, eastern Kentucky, and central and eastern Tennessee into northern Alabama there, where we could be watching for the potential of some scattered flash flooding. For tomorrow, we do have a marginal threat that extends from Massachusetts, Rhode Island, southern Connecticut, southern New York, the New York City region, northern New Jersey into Maryland and eastern Pennsylvania there, where we could see the potential for some isolated flash flooding. For day 3 outlook, we currently don't have anything issued for the potential of flash flooding. For our winter weather outlooks for today, we do have a big risk for some heavy snowfall for the Midwest there, for the upper peninsula of Michigan, northern Michigan, as well as mainly Wisconsin. And then for our day 2 outlook for tomorrow, we are looking at the potential of some pretty heavy snowfall extending from the Midwest, but to mainly across the New England corridor. And then for our day 3 outlook, we are going to continue to see some pretty heavy snowfall for the New England corridor, but it will be mainly exiting out into Canada. Taking a look at our weather models, starting off with our 500 millibars and our surface observations, and how those are going to work in conjunction for our risk for severe thunderstorms. Let's start off with our surface observations. As of right now, we do have some storms that are currently ongoing, with the tornado watch and a couple tornado warnings, indicating that the atmosphere is already prime and ready for tornadic development, and some of which is already ongoing. However, these storms are likely going to clear out over the next couple of hours, and then we are expected to see additional development behind this. So this is not the main risk. This will clear out eventually. But we do have a surface low that is trying to work its way in. This will likely translate into the Indiana, northern Ohio region in the next couple of hours. And then we also do have a warm front that is expected to push up into Michigan, potentially into Canada, with a pretty big warm sector across this region. Actually, it may be further down south to mainly northern Ohio, to the Pennsylvania region. And then this cold front is also expected to trail behind the surface low, and that will initiate our storms. But we are also expected to see the potential for some additional development that's going to be freeing the warm sector. Something I do want to note is that if we switch over to satellite here, we are way ahead of schedule, and we are seeing much greater clearing and much greater surface heating than originally forecasted. So that could potentially impact our risk for severe thunderstorms in a big way, with overall greater lapse rates and potentially greater instability as well. So we will definitely watch that. We'll definitely keep an eye on that, because that is potentially going to be the make or break it for severe thunderstorms, because that is a much more surface heating than what the HRRR was previously indicating. But if we move back to our models here, we do have a quite vigorous trough that is advecting out of the south-southwest. We do have a short wave that is currently positioned across this area and is trying to merge with another trough out of Canada. However, this pretty strong jet is expected to continue to move into the region over the next couple of hours, and we could potentially see mid-level flow upwards of 100 to 110 miles per hour advect into the region of concern. And the same goes for further down south. We could see mid-level flow upwards of 70 to 80 miles per hour as far south as the Dixie states. So that will definitely be very supportive of the potential for severe thunderstorms, and may provide us with quite a lot of speed shear for the potential of hail as well. Taking a look at our 850 millibars in our low-level jet and how that's going to affect our risk for tornadoes across this region and our directional shear, let's focus on the 15% tornado risk first. We are expected to see a pretty strong low-level jet that is going to start off around 5 p.m. With around 50 to 60 miles per hour of 850 millibar flow, which is already very sufficient for the potential of some pretty decent shear and tornadoes across this region. However, we are expected to see that wildly increase to potentially around 70 to 60 miles per hour across this region, across the 15% tornado risk area. In the next update, I could definitely see the 15% potentially be extended down further south into more central, potentially reaching northern Tennessee there, because of how this low-level jet is looking, and overall what the models have been indicating is the best tornado risk. I could definitely see this 15% potentially being shifted down further south in the next update. But with how strong and how vigorous this low-level jet is, we should definitely see quite a lot of shear across this region, and that will definitely be able to support a pretty big risk for tornadoes. Taking a look at our 200 millibars and how that's going to affect our speed shear and our looking for defluence, what we're looking for is the spreading of our wind vectors, and what that will do is that will create a void in the upper levels of the atmosphere, because the atmosphere is a gas and would like to achieve equilibrium any way it can. Air from the mid levels and the low levels will rise to fill that gap, and that's how you get very large widespread lift, and it can wildly help with the risk for severe thunderstorms. But starting off with our speed shear, we are definitely seeing a pretty strong 200 millibar jet upwards of 120 130 knots, and that will definitely provide us with quite a lot of speed shear, and we could definitely see the potential for some gorilla hail across this region. And as far as our defluence and our spreading of our wind vectors, it's kind of hard to tell. It's kind of subtle, but you can definitely see that there is some spreading of our wind vectors, which may be able to aid in may be able to be some pretty good aid to the risk for severe thunderstorms across this region. Not really too sure how well it will help with our risk for severe thunderstorms, but we could definitely see some pretty big aid come out of that. I think it will be more so further down to the south towards the Dixie states. That's where I've been noticing the defluence mainly. So we could definitely see some pretty big aid out of that, but I'm honestly unsure. Taking a look at our storm relative velocity and our directional shear and how that's going to affect our risk for tornadoes across this region. Again, that low-level jet is no joke. We should definitely see some pretty strong directional shear come out of that, and that's what we're going to see. We may be able to see storm relative velocity values that may be able to range upwards of 600 to potentially 500 meters squared a second squared of storm relative velocity across Kentucky into southern Ohio. And you can see, as I mentioned previously, that we may be able to see a shift to the south in that 15% tornado risk. We will check this other model run to see if that continues to trend. And it does look like it is mainly trending further down to the south on the previous model run as well. So we could very well see that 15% tornado risk potentially be extended down to look something kind of like this. that is definitely not out of the question, but that storm relative velocity is definitely no joke and will definitely support the possibility of multiple strong and long track tornadoes across this region. Taking a look at our bulk shear and how that's going to affect our hail risk for this region, again, we could see the potential of some pretty large hail. We do have a pretty big amounts of speed shear across this region. It's definitely not going to be as much as yesterday, but we are seeing bulk shear values at 0 to 6 kilometer, upwards of 80 to 70 knots ahead of storms, and then backing storms, we may be able to see some pretty widespread bulk shear values upwards of 80 knots, 80 to 70 knots. So we could definitely see a pretty big hail risk come out of that, and definitely a potential for some massive hail, and that may even be able to increase to potentially 90 knots of bulk shear later this afternoon. Taking a look at our composite reflectivity, I'm going to be going over the when where we should be able to see our severe thunderstorms and the timing, as well as some general radar analysis. So let's start off with some of the storms that are already ongoing. We do have a cluster of storms that is leading to the potential of some tornadic development, as well as mainly a damaging wind risk with wind gusts upwards of 70 to 90 knots plus into West Virginia. And then we also have another cluster that's currently ongoing into western Tennessee. This cluster of storms in the north is going to move out into the Virginia region and not really pose all that much of a risk later on. We may be able to see some severe thunderstorm, somewhat of a severe thunderstorm risk out of that. However, I don't really see much going on with it after that. And then this cluster of storms, this is going to be ahead of the main development. This is going to move out into Kentucky. This isn't really going to be associated with the main risk for tornadoes, but we could still definitely see the potential of some tornadoes come out of that. It may be able to limit our instability a little bit ahead of that storm, ahead of our main risk, because it could definitely support the potential for some hail, some damaging wind gusts. It may introduce some more rain-cooled air ahead of it. However, we definitely may not see all that much of an impact on our storms from that. But then our main development is expected to begin across western Tennessee, western Kentucky, and down into Mississippi in mainly a messy line configuration from around 3 p.m. And then we may also see potentially more of a discrete mode, but also potentially more of a messy system as well further up north around 3 p.m. And those are going to track into the Nashville region in central Kentucky, central Tennessee, producing the potential for tornadoes and large hail, potentially some strong damaging wind gusts around 5 p.m. And then we should see the majority of our risk for tornadoes across the Ohio, Indiana, and northern Kentucky region, anywhere from 6 p.m. to potentially midnight and to potentially around 1 a.m. It is a pretty messy setup, though. I'm honestly unsure how that will or affect the risk for severe thunderstorms. However, it may potentially be more of a limiting factor, but regardless, we could still see the potential of multiple strong long track tornadoes and the potential for strong damaging wind gusts and massive hail. Taking a look at the environment that storms are going to be in, starting off with our dew points, we are expected to see some pretty deep dew points across this region. Along the cold front, we may be able to see dew points that may be able to get upwards of the upper 60s. And it doesn't really look like our dew points are going to be too affected by the storms that were previously going to be ongoing. Our warm air advection should definitely recover whatever is lost pretty effectively and pretty quickly. And with what we have as far as our dew points, potentially getting upwards of the upper 60s and the mid 60s across the majority of the warm sector, we could definitely see quite a lot of instability come out of that. Taking a look at our temperatures and how that's going to affect our instability, we are expected to see quite a lot of heat across this region. We may be able to see temperatures that may be able to range anywhere from the 70s to 80s across the Dixie states into eastern Tennessee, with dew points that or temperatures that may be a little bit more cooled from storms that are currently ongoing ahead of the primary convective line that may be able to be cooled down to the mid to upper 70s, which is still gonna be pretty warm and be pretty sufficient for instability. And then further up north, we are expected to see potentially less instability, or sorry, less less heat than previously thought, but keep in mind we do have much more of a clearing in our cloud cover than what was previously anticipated. So these temperatures are probably going to be much more than what we are currently seeing right now on models, with models mainly indicating upwards of the low 70s to the upper 60s. We could very well see temperatures potentially reach the mid 70s to potentially the low 80s with what we have now from that clearing. Again, that clearing is going to be a sufficient and very big aiding factor in the risk for not only tornadoes, but the potential for significant severe thunderstorms across this region. Taking a look at our lapse rates, taking a look at the 15% tornado risk first, and then we'll move further down south. We are expected to see some pretty limited lapse rates on models, with lapse rates that are there upwards of 6 to the low 7s, which is honestly still supportive and will definitely aid in the risk for not only hail but also our instability. However, again, keep in mind the clearing that we are having across this region is going to lead to much greater lapse rates than previously anticipated. So we could very well potentially see lapse rates that may be very similar to further down south, where we may be able to see lapse rates that could potentially get upwards of the upper 7s, which will definitely be a major aid in the potential for hail, as well as our instability across this region. So we could see greater instability than what you're about to see on models as a result of the clearing that is going to be across this region. And then further down south, we are expected to see some much greater lapse rates that may be able to get upwards of the upper 7s and the mid 7s into some of the Dixie states, and then the 6s in the low 7s across the Tennessee region. This is definitely a lot more plausible because of some of the storms that are currently ongoing across this region ahead of the main convective line. So we may see more cloud cover and overall less lapse rates, but we could definitely see some pretty decent instability. Taking a look at our 700 millibar temperatures and our convective inhibition, how that's going to affect our risk for severe thunderstorms and our instability across this region, we are expected to see quite a lot of warm air advection out of the south-southwest. We may see much greater warm air advection, a much warmer advection out of the south, closer into the Tennessee, Mississippi, and the Dixie states, which may lead to overall more convective inhibition further down south, but that may lead to a pretty decent elevated mixed layer across this region, which may keep some convection at bay until storms can actually fire. However, I am noticing that we do mainly have the lack of a cap indicated by our the lack of our unshaded contours across this region, which may allow for our warm air to rise above that cap into the upper levels of our atmosphere, which may overall limit the explosiveness of storms, but regardless, we could definitely see a pretty big day ahead of us, and we could definitely see quite a lot of instability. However, over the last couple of days, we've had a really strong cap, so that probably has helped with the overall building of heat and building of instability. However, I'm not really too sure what the lack of a cap will do, especially with the risk for severe thunderstorms that we have. But I think that this may not really be too may not affect our risk for severe thunderstorms that much. Taking a look at our most unstable cape and how that's going to fuel our risk for severe thunderstorms across this region, and why I think it's going to be necessary that we extend that 15% tornado risk further down to the south. Again, we are seeing some pretty decent instability, upwards of 2,000 joules per kilogram, which will definitely be sufficient to fuel the potential for significant severe thunderstorms and the potential for multiple long track and potentially strong tornadoes as well. We overall have much better instability further down south towards central Tennessee and central Kentucky and southern Kentucky, but we also don't really have as much instability, and it doesn't last as long through the entire 15% tornado risk and the entire moderate risk further up to the north in Ohio. So overall, I'm not really too sure how that's going to affect our risk for severe thunderstorms, but I think it may be a pretty significant limiting factor. But again, we have to keep in mind that we have a clearing that is way ahead of schedule and much bigger than what models previously anticipated. So we should definitely see potentially much greater instability, and instability that's going to last much longer support a much longer lasting risk for severe thunderstorms across this region. I'm honestly not really too sure because our instability goes below 1,000, gets below sub 1,000 in southern Ohio around 9 p.m. while storms are still basically in the middle of the 15% tornado risk. But shear is definitely still in place to support tornadoes. So I think it is definitely going to be necessary to extend that 15% tornado risk further down to the south in the next SPC update. Taking a look at our surface-based cape, I don't really have much to say about this, but it does look like our most unstable cape is translating down to our surface. So we should definitely see some surface-based storms. We shouldn't have a problem with surface-based storms across this region. Taking a look at our 0 to 3 kilometer instability and how that's going to aid in the risk for severe thunderstorms across this region. Again, and another reason why I think we should have that 15% extended down into northern Tennessee and southern central Kentucky. We are expected to see an insane amount of 0 to 3 kilometer instability across this region, with values that may be able to get upwards of 100 to potentially 200 joules per kilogram of 0 to 3 kilometer instability. Very big pocket of some very strong 0 to 3 kilometer instability, as well as with what directional shear we are expected to see across this region being as strong as it is. We could definitely see a substantial tornado risk across central Tennessee and Kentucky, but we also can't forget about the 15% tornado risk further up north, with some pretty decent 0 to 3 kilometer instability there as well, which will also be able to support the potential for tornadoes, as again potentially strong and long track tornadoes, potentially a couple of them across that region. Taking a look at our energy helicity index values and how that's going to affect our risk for tornadoes across this region, we are expected to see some quite wild energy helicity index values. Again, this is the biggest tornado risk I have ever forecasted on this channel thus far, and the energy helicity index values really go to show that as well. We are expected to see energy helicity index values across southern Kentucky and northern central Tennessee that may be able to get upwards of 5 to potentially 6. And then across the 15% tornado risk, strong energy helicity index values as well, upwards of 2 to potentially 3, maybe reaching some 4s. But again, another substantial reason why I think we should have that 15% tornado risk extended further down south is also the composites as well. Plus, overall, there's a better combination of instability in our shear further down south. So, again, we could definitely see the potential of multiple multiple strong and potentially long track tornadoes across this region. And then taking a look at our SIG-TOR parameter, and again, this still shows why we should have that 15% tornado risk extended further down south, and also shows the overall, how overall substantial this risk for tornadoes is. We have a very big SIG-TOR parameter values, upwards of 3, 2, 1s, in a very widespread and very large area, and then up into the Ohio region in the 15% tornado risk, we continue to see those big SIG-TOR values, which are definitely very supportive and very indicative of the potential of, again, multiple strong and potentially long track tornadoes, and this risk may even be potentially greater than what models are indicating with that new clearing that we have. So again, this is a very big risk for tornadoes across this area. Taking a look at our wind gust models and how that's going to show the potential for damaging wind gusts across this region, you can already tell that just by in the middle of the model run, we already have very widespread and very strong damaging wind gusts associated with these storms. We could see damaging wind gusts that may be able to reach upwards of 70 to potentially 80 and maybe even potentially approaching 90 miles per hour across this region. Again, we could definitely see some pretty destructive damaging wind gusts along with the risk for tornadoes and massive hail. Taking a look at the SP mesoanalysis page and the potential for massive hail across this region, our large hail parameter is indicating that storms are already exhibiting the potential for some pretty large hailstones. And then we can also go over some of the other composites for hail. With our significant hail parameter, again, it is still indicating the potential of some significant hail with 1 and 1.5 on the significant hail parameter there. And then with our SARS hail percentage, We do have something here. We do have a 20, but we also do have a couple of shaded areas. Our hail risk is definitely not supposed to be as big as yesterday, but we could still see some massive hail. Now that I've told you the weather, please go down to the description and check out the socials for Project Gladiator, and join the Discord for any updates on Project Gladiator. If you live in any of the areas I covered for today, please stay with the alert for the time being. If you noticed anything might have been wrong in this forecast, or would like to make a suggestion or ask a question, please leave a comment. 3 other channels I highly suggest you check out are JaxonWX, One Nation Weather, and Weather Watcher. Their links to their channels will be in the description, and hopefully I'll be able to see you guys tomorrow with another forecast.